Hello everyone, my name is Jaime Alonso. I'm director at Nonica.io and I'm very happy to be here today again. This is my second year in BIM Coordinator Submit. So I'm very glad to be sharing with you this year presentation, which is going to be about implementing a monitoring and automation strategy at Witteveen+Bos. So without further ado, I wanted to give a little bit of introduction about ourselves, what we do. We are, a Dutch startup based in Delft, and we're basically specializing developing custom solutions, but also implementing automation strategies, mainly in Revit. So we are Autodesk authorized developers, and we do have also products published in Autodesk App Store, like Nonica Tab, for example. So first of all, why do we come into place? What is the problem? So we come to Witteveen+Bos because first of all, they have like an unused library of scripts. They have some developers, Dynamo developers and Python developers, but the library of scripts that they developed were not used at all in the company. So they wanted to make those scripts more accessible to the average users. So basically they could automate more design task, and also share company-specific procedures and standards across projects. Ultimately, the goal was also to increase productivity and work more efficiently and reduce the time spent in projects. So the software we use, we use Revit 2023 as the design framework that they were using. So we wanted everything to be integrated in Revit, so every Revit user could make use of it straight away. Secondly, Dynamo and Python as a development framework for scripts. Their library was also in Dynamo and Python, but we also developed some specific scripts that were integrated in the automation strategy. Finally, we use Nonica Tab Pro, is our own product, and is mainly focused on integrating scripts as Revit bottoms. Going into the first step of the implementation, we first did a selection of scripts from their library. So we selected these 10 scripts. So I'm not going to go into the detail of each of the scripts, but I do want to give a little bit of an introduction to make examples of automations that you can achieve in Revit. So for example, the first one, import satellite image. This script basically took the coordinate from the Revit model and automatically import the Google Map image into the model. So you no longer need to do that manually, which can be a little bit time consuming. Secondly, we have calculate average topo level. So for that, based on a topography, the script calculated the average topo level to set the ground floor level. It was also very helpful for designers in early stages of the design. Thirdly, we have create 3D view from section. This was useful for designers to explore in 3D view when they were creating sections and the geometry in Revit. So it was more like a helpful tool to explore and visualize the geometry for designers. Fourth, we have the coordinates to all piles. Based on company-specific parameters with this script, we basically automated how all the coordinates were added to every single pile. So that was all done in one run and just pressing a button instead to having to do that manually one by one. Then in the fifth place, we have add clean marks in elements. This is helpful for working with the mark parameters in Revit. And it was a way to add and clean those parameters in their geometry. Then we have the fill sheet parameters from Excel. Well, in some cases, they have some Excel sheet that they wanted to bring from Revit and to Revit. And with this script, we enable that custom transfer of parameters from Excel to Revit and the other way around. Then we have adjust floor to 3D polyline. Well, with this script, we could adapt a floor to follow a certain shape while defining a 3D polyline. This is helpful, for example, for terraces when they need to gather rainy water, for example. Additionally, we have connect beams to floor. well, this script was used for swapping beams to floors when there were like wooden beams, for example, or steel beams. Add dimensions from model lines to automatically create dimensions and measurements from model lines, and finally create hatch files from model lines. This was basically used for well, editing and modifying hatches and bringing them to Revit afterwards. So with this selection on mind, we're going to go into the next step is how we did the implementation. Well, the implementation follows several steps. Initially, well, we installed Tab, of course, and we did the selection of Dynamo scripts. So we went into the Revit professionals. There were, well, initially there were 7 of them. And well, the 7 professionals started using the scripts. From there, we have a feedback meeting with them every week during the 10 week of the implementation period. But also we also gather data from the usage of the scripts. So we could have very specific information about how the automation strategy was being used. After the feedback, well, we update with new features, the bottoms, we update the Python and Dynamo scripts as well. Also, we replace some of them if they were not used that often. So this was an iterative process that we follow during the 10 weeks. And well, we iterate over and over, and the goal was to well, to have like a consistent automation strategy that was being used across the company after we leave the company. So for that, before actually sharing the script, we follow a standardization process. Well, we basically took the script that we selected and we standardized them. So what does standardize mean? Well, in our case, we follow 4 steps. We made sure that the installation packages were consistent across the scripts, because initially they were developed by different people in the company, some of them. So we needed to make them consistent while consistently using the same installation packages. Additionally, we checked that the scripts selected were versatile enough across different projects and situations. We do not want to integrate a script that were project specific. We want a script that could be used in different projects and situations. Then we use a common language and inputs well defined as well. So what we did is we translated some of their script were in Dutch, some in English. So we established English as the common language. We translated all the inputs and organized all the inputs, so the final user could find all the information consistently when they were going to use the scripts. Finally, we set up a concise and standard structure of information. With that, I mean that, well, we structure the bottoms consistently, so they could understand what each bottom was doing in just one look. They do not have to spend 10 minutes reading long explanation and description. The information was shown very clearly and concisely. And after that standardization process, we went into the deployment. For the deployment, what we did basically is we created a central hub. We used OneDrive because OneDrive was the server, the cloud system that the company was using. And in that, in OneDrive, we created a share folder that gave access to all users. And the share folder mainly was going to host 2 things. The first one is that it's going to host the central toolbar file. Well, that is going to include all the information of the bottoms, and all users are going to have access to that central file. Secondly, it's going to contain a database of all the executions. This central hub was created with Tab Pro as well. And basically, every time a bottom was pushed, a Revit professional pushed a bottom from Tab, that usage information was gathered into the central hub. So later on, in that case, it was me who monitored the strategy, so I could go into the central location and explore the executions and take a specific decision in the automation strategies. Additionally, every time a bottom was pushed, the version of the toolbar was checked from the central location. So if there was an update or a newer version than the one that the user had, well, the toolbar was automatically updated. So in that way, we made sure that all the users were using always the latest version of the toolbar. Basically, I had access to that central location as well to visualize and analyze the executions, but also make updates. So the whole goal was not to make a deployment and then leave the company, but instead to iterate over the strategy, to make updates, to modify the scripts, and to really make sure that was being used, well, the tool were being used across the different projects that we selected. So the data collection, basically, these are all the fields that were gathered every time a button was pushed. So we have information, for example, about the users that enables us to, for example, propose trainings or discuss with specific professionals, well, when they were not using the tool or when they were using very often, what prompt them to use them more. But we also have more technical information. For example, the script was successfully run, if there were warnings, if there were errors, when they were run, which specific nodes brought errors or parts of the scripts. Additionally, different software versions like Dynamo version or Revit version, and how were the scripts run, if they were scheduled or run from a shortcut, for example. For visualizing and analyzing the data, we use Tab Pro. This is all built in Revit. Because of data protection, we cannot show the real data of the implementation strategy. However, we have brought a data sample that will make you have an idea of well, the decisions it can help you make and the data you can explore with well, with this system. Well, as you can see, we have like 4 graphs. The one in the top left brings all the executions. It basically gives you an overall idea of the different executions made across the team, how many errors, warnings were made, or how many times it was run successfully. Then at the right, we have the timeline, which enable us to actually keep track on how the automation strategy was evolving. So in this way, we could have an idea if there were more scripts being run now than before, if we have solved certain errors that we had before, and explore how well, how the strategy was developing overall. Then in the right, we do have the different version of software that the user were using. So that was also helpful to detect which project was running the different versions, but also to detect compatibility issues for different versions. So these graphs were well integrated in Revit. This is all built in Revit, so you don't actually need to Power BI or Excel to create your own graphs. This is all built and ready to be explored. Basically, we just went into settings and go to data analytics. All the graphs are basically interactive. So whenever you hover over, you see the specific data points of the graphs. So that brings you more insights into the different graphs and well, enables you to make more accurate decisions. Lowest part, like the lowest bar chart, we have the execution per Dynamo script. This is probably the most interesting part of all the graphs. In this part, we can see the execution for each single Dynamo script. So if we have a script that is run very often, as we see now, we can maintain it. And if we have errors in all of them, in some of them, we can replace them. Additionally, we can, for example, see the execution by users. As I was saying, this is a sample data set. This is not the real one because of data protection, but we can have an idea of which specific user is not running a script, for example, to reassign a license, to propose training, to have feedback discussion with those specific users, and for example, also detect who is making more use and award those users, for example. So all this data became much more powerful because we were able to actually interact with it more in depth. We, for example, filter the data by date, and that enable us to see very specific executions for certain periods. But we also filter we can also filter by users. By filtering by user, we can see well, all the graphs for that specific user, which can be very helpful to well, to explore the execution of a specific user of a certain script. Finally, we can explore the execution by different projects and see how are those using the different projects. If there is a script that is not being used in a project, maybe it's for a reason. Maybe it's not compatible with that situation. And then we can, of course, export them to well, to image if we want to share them. But focusing on our case in the implementation strategy, well, that enabled us to make several updates. Because we don't have a lot of time in this presentation, I'm going to make this brief. We basically update 3 or 4 scripts in this case. For example, the field sheet parameters from Excel, we update that to adapt to the changes in the Revit templates. But we also developed 3 more scripts, like create, add, record, design log, in order to enable designers to well, to automate a design log that they have. Every time they make a change in the design, they need to keep a log on that. But additionally, standardize certain workflows, such as DWG or IFC export. So in that way, all the users were exporting to DWG and IFC consistently, without errors that we have found in the Revit built-in exporter, for example. So the conclusion of the strategy were mainly 3. Well, first of all, is that Witteveen+Bos found that simple scripts were much more often used than very complex scripts, because they were easier to understand, and that increased the trust of non-experts. Because well, the average Revit user don't really well develop those scripts. It was easier for them to understand those simple scripts and increase the trust and promote more usage of those scripts. Secondly, well, we transfer the strategy. We train BIM specialists in the company to well, to update, to modify the toolbar in the central location, but also to monitor well, the strategy, and well, to keep track on how was the automation strategy going over time. Finally, we are very happy that we increase efficiency, which was one of the ultimate goals of the strategy. So it is estimated, between the data gathered and the interviews that we did at the end of the automation strategy, it is estimated that we increase around 15% well, the efficiency in their projects, so which is quite a lot, which save them a lot of time and resources, and enable them to reduce, for example, the personnel involved in a central project, and yeah, after all, work more efficiently. And that's the end of the presentation. If you have any question, I will be very, very glad to try to answer them. But also, if you want to be more specific and prefer to send us an email, you can also contact us to Jaime@nonica.io. Thank you very much.